My 6-year-old daughter was sitting in the driveway with her nurse. My daughter is very sick and needs help to even sit up. The nurse was holding her hand and telling her a story. It was a peaceful, sunny afternoon. Everything was quiet. Then, Karen from the HOA came marching over. She was holding a heavy binder and looked furious. She started screaming that the medical equipment was ugly and was ruining the neighborhood's look. The nurse stood up quietly to protect my daughter. She said in a calm voice, "Please, she is just a child. We aren't hurting anyone." This made Karen even more mad. She screamed, "Don't you tell me what to do!" Karen raised her heavy binder and swung it with all her might. She hit the nurse right across the face. Then, she started hitting her again and again. My daughter began to scream and cry in her chair. She was terrified. Tears ran down her face as she sobbed, "Daddy, help Sarah! She's hurting Sarah!" Karen stood over the bleeding nurse with her hands on her hips. She looked proud, like she had won a prize. She did not know that the man who just stepped out of the front door was a Navy SEAL and her father. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you're watching from. And please hit subscribe for more stories where the good guys always win. My 6-year-old daughter was sitting in the driveway with her nurse. She can't sit up on her own for very long. Even that takes effort. So Sarah, her nurse, had positioned her carefully in her special chair, adjusting the supports just right, making sure her breathing equipment was comfortable, making sure nothing pinched or pulled. Sarah always did things gently. That afternoon, she was holding my daughter's hand and telling her a story, one of the soft ones, the kind with animals and silly voices and endings that didn't scare children who already had enough to be scared of. My daughter listened quietly, her fingers weak but curled trustingly around Sarah's. The sun was warm, not hot, just enough to feel comforting on your skin. Birds hopped along the fence line. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower droned and then went silent again. The world moved slowly, politely, like it knew this moment needed space. Everything was peaceful. I stood just inside the front door, watching through the glass. I did that a lot, not because I didn't trust the world, but because the world didn't always understand how fragile some moments were, how fragile some people were. Sarah laughed softly at the end of the story. "And then the turtle won the race," she said, smiling, "because slow doesn't mean weak." My daughter smiled back. "I like the turtle," she whispered. "I know you do," Sarah said. "He's brave." The sound of fast footsteps cut across the quiet. Not hurried, angry. I looked up. Karen from the HOA was marching down the sidewalk toward our driveway. She didn't slow down as she approached, didn't hesitate. She walked like someone who had already decided how this was going to end. She carried a thick binder under her arm, stuffed with papers, tabs sticking out at odd angles. The kind of binder people use when they want rules to feel heavier than they really are. Her mouth was tight. Her eyes locked onto the driveway like she'd found proof of a crime. My daughter noticed her before Sarah did. Her smile faded. "Daddy?" she called softly, not looking away from the woman approaching. "Who is that?" Before I could answer, Karen spoke. Her voice was sharp enough to cut through the calm. "This is unacceptable," she snapped, gesturing wildly. "Absolutely unacceptable." Sarah turned, instantly alert. "Can I help you?" she asked calmly, stepping just slightly closer to my daughter's chair. Karen scoffed. "That," she said, pointing at the medical equipment, "is ruining the entire look of the neighborhood. People don't want to see that when they drive by." My daughter flinched. She looked down at herself, at the chair, at the tubes and supports. She didn't fully understand, but knew she needed. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to." Sarah knelt beside her immediately. "You didn't do anything wrong," she said softly. "You're okay." Karen rolled her eyes. "Don't patronize me," she snapped. "There are standards here, rules, and I'm tired of them being ignored." Sarah stood slowly, not aggressively, protectively. "She's a child," she said. "She's very sick. We're not hurting anyone. That should have been the end of it." Most people would have paused, rethought their tone, stepped back. Karen didn't. Her face flushed. Her grip on the binder tightened. "Don't you tell me what to do," she shouted. "I enforce the rules around here." My daughter started to tremble. She squeezed Sarah's hand harder. "Please," she whispered. "I want to go inside." Sarah nodded and reached for the handles of the chair. "Of course," she said gently. "We're going inside." That was when Karen stepped forward. Too close, too fast. I opened the front door. The sound echoed louder than I expected. Karen turned her head slightly, annoyed, but she didn't stop. She raised the binder, and in that moment, before anything else happened, I knew. Some people don't see children. They see obstacles. They see inconveniences. They see things they want removed. I took one step onto the porch. My daughter screamed, and the peaceful afternoon shattered. There is a moment, just before something terrible happens, when the world seems to hold its breath. I felt it. The air changed. The quiet afternoon that had wrapped itself around the driveway only minutes earlier pulled back, like it knew it couldn't stay. Karen lifted the binder. Not high, not dramatically. Just enough to make Sarah react. She moved without thinking, stepping fully in front of my daughter's chair, turning her body sideways to shield her. One arm came up instinctively, not to fight, not to threaten, but to protect. "Please," Sarah said again, her voice still calm but firmer now. "Step back." Karen laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't wild. It was sharp and dismissive, like the sound someone makes when they believe they're untouchable. "You don't get to tell me what to do on my own street," she snapped. My daughter cried out. "Stop yelling," she begged. "Please stop." Her voice was thin, fragile, the kind of voice that should have ended everything right there. It didn't. Karen took another step forward. I was already moving down the porch steps, but the distance felt impossible, like the ground had stretched itself just to keep me from reaching them in time. Sarah saw the binder move. She didn't dodge. She didn't retreat. She held her ground. The binder struck her with a dull, awful sound. Not loud, not cinematic, just wrong. The kind of sound that doesn't echo but stays where it lands. Sarah stumbled. She caught herself on one knee, one hand still reaching back toward my daughter's chair, refusing to leave her unprotected. Karen didn't stop. She shouted something, words that didn't even register as language anymore, just noise fueled by anger. She swung again and again, not wildly, deliberately, each motion driven by the same belief, that she was right, that she was in charge, that no one could stop her. My daughter screamed. It wasn't loud at first. It was a panicked, breathless sound, pure fear. She twisted in her chair, trying to reach Sarah, her small body shaking with effort she didn't have. "Daddy!" she cried. "Help Sarah! She's hurting Sarah!" The sound of my daughter's voice did something to the world. Someone shouted from across the street. A car screeched to a stop. I heard a phone hit the ground, and another voice yelling that the police had been called. Karen finally stepped back, not because she understood what she'd done, but because she'd been seen. Sarah collapsed onto the driveway, breathing hard, one hand pressed to her face, the other still extended toward my daughter like she hadn't quite accepted that she could let go. My daughter sobbed uncontrollably. Her whole body shook, her breathing shallow and uneven. "Sarah, don't leave," she cried. "Please don't leave." "I'm here," Sarah said weakly. "I'm right here." Karen stood over them. Her chest rose and fell quickly. Her knuckles were white where she still clutched the binder. For a moment, just a moment, she looked uncertain. Then her face hardened. She straightened her back, crossed her arms, and looked around like she expected applause, like she'd done what needed to be done, like she'd enforced order. I reached them then. I dropped to my knees beside my daughter first, gripping the sides of her chair to steady it, to steady myself. "I'm here," I said. "You're safe. I've got you. S." He threw her arms around my neck, sobbing into my shoulder. "She hurt Sarah," she repeated over and over. "She hurt Sarah." I looked at Sarah. She met my eyes and tried to smile. "I'm okay," she said, though it was clear she wasn't. "Just stay with her." I stood slowly. Karen finally looked at me directly. Up close, she didn't look powerful. She looked small, angry, afraid. "You can't let your people break the rules," she said defensively, her voice shaking just slightly. "This is my job." "This," I said evenly, "is not your job." Sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Karen heard them. Her eyes flicked toward the street, then back to me. She opened her mouth to say something else, another justification, another excuse. But for the first time since she'd arrived, she didn't speak, because she could feel it now. The shift, the moment where power leaves a room and consequences start walking in. The sirens grew louder, not rushing, arriving. That difference mattered. It meant someone had already called. Someone had already seen enough to know this wasn't a misunderstanding or a disagreement about rules. This was something else. I stayed beside my daughter, my arm wrapped around her shoulders, my body angled so she couldn't see Sarah too clearly. She was still crying, the kind of deep, hiccuping sobs that come from fear more than pain. "It's okay," I whispered. "You're safe. I'm right here." She clung to me like the world might disappear if she let go. Across the driveway, Karen shifted her weight. She looked around at the growing crowd, neighbors stepping out of their houses, cars pulled over, phones raised. The binder lay at her feet now, dropped sometime between certainty and doubt. She didn't pick it up. She didn't need it anymore. The sound of authority had changed. Sarah tried to sit up. I noticed immediately. "Don't," I said gently, kneeling closer to her. "Help is coming." She nodded, breathing carefully, focusing on staying present. "I didn't want her to see," she said quietly. "I tried to block her." "You did," I said. "You did exactly what you needed to do." My daughter heard that. "She's brave," my daughter said through her tears. "Yes," I replied, "she is." The first patrol car pulled up, lights flashing softly against the houses. Not aggressive, just unmistakable. 2 officers stepped out. They didn't shout. They didn't run. They took one look at the scene and understood. One officer came straight to us, lowering himself to my daughter's level. "Hey," he said gently. "I'm Officer Ruiz. Are you okay?" She nodded slightly, still holding on to me. He turned to Sarah next. "Ma'am, can you tell me what happened?" Karen took a sharp step forward. "Ma'am," the second officer said calmly, without raising his voice. "Please stay where you are." Karen froze. That was the first time someone had told her to stop, and she listened. Sarah spoke slowly, clearly. She didn't exaggerate. She didn't need to. Her voice carried weight because it carried truth. While she spoke, neighbors filled in the gaps. I saw it from my porch. She was yelling before she hit her. The child was crying. She wouldn't stop. Each voice added another brick, another wall. Karen's posture changed with every statement. Her shoulders dropped, her chin lifted defensively. Her eyes darted, not in anger now, but calculation. The officers listened, they wrote, they recorded, they asked questions that had answers. An ambulance arrived. Paramedics moved with quiet efficiency, checking Sarah, speaking softly to my daughter, offering blankets, water, reassurance. One of them looked at me. "Are you the father?" "Yes." "She's lucky she had someone between her and danger," he said, nodding toward Sarah. "That matters." Karen scoffed weakly. "Danger," she said. I was enforcing HOA standards. No one looked at her. That silence was louder than any argument. An officer finally turned to her. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "we're going to need you to step over here." Karen hesitated. "I didn't do anything wrong," she insisted. "I have authority." The officer nodded once. "You don't have authority over people," he replied. "Only rules, and even those have limits." She took another step back. That's when I stood, slowly, not suddenly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Karen looked at me. Really looked this time. The crowd parted just slightly, like the space itself understood something had shifted. "Is she going to be okay?" I asked one of the paramedics, nodding toward Sarah. "Yes," he said. "She'll need treatment, but she's stable." I nodded. Karen swallowed. "You didn't say who you were," she muttered. I didn't answer. The officer beside her did. He doesn't have to. That was when it reached her. Not fear, recognition. The realization that the man she'd dismissed, the one she'd assumed would back down, apologize, comply, wasn't bound by her rules. He wasn't afraid of her binder, or her title, or her noise. The officers asked her to place her hands where they could see them. She protested, briefly, then complied. Phones recorded. Neighbors watched. My daughter rested her head against my chest, exhausted. "Daddy," she whispered, "is it over?" "It's moving forward," I said. "That's how it starts." Karen was guided toward the patrol car. Not shoved, not humiliated, just removed. As she passed us, she finally looked at my daughter. Really looked. And for the first time since she'd arrived, her expression wasn't anger. It was understanding, too late. The car door closed. The sirens faded. The driveway felt bigger again, quieter. Sarah was lifted onto a stretcher. She reached out and squeezed my daughter's hand gently. "You were very brave," she said. My daughter nodded, tears finally slowing. "So were you," she replied. The paramedics smiled. I watched the ambulance pull away, watched the neighbors disperse, watched the last pieces of chaos leave with them. Then I carried my daughter inside, past the doorway, across the threshold, back into safety. And as I closed the door behind us, I knew something else had crossed the threshold too. Karen's authority. It wouldn't be coming back. The house felt different once the door closed. Not empty, not quiet, just recalibrated, like it had absorbed the shock and was now settling into a new shape. I laid my daughter on the couch, propping her gently with pillows the way Sarah always did. She was exhausted, her eyes heavy, her breathing finally steady enough that the panic had loosened its grip. "I want my blanket," she murmured. I brought it to her, tucking it around her shoulders. "You're safe," I said. "I'm not going anywhere," she nodded, trusting me with the part of her that still felt unsteady. Outside, the low murmur of voices drifted through the walls. Officials coordinating, neighbors explaining. The sound of procedure replacing chaos. That's how power changes hands. Not with shouting, with structure. A knock came at the door. Measured. Professional. I opened it to find 2 officers. One I recognized from the driveway, another in plain clothes. Their expressions were calm, focused. "Sir," the plainclothes officer said, "we'd like to speak with you when you're ready." I gestured toward the living room. "She's resting," I said. "We can talk quietly." They stepped inside, respectful of the space. The officer introduced himself and began asking questions. Not accusatory, not rushed. He wanted the order of events, the timing, the words used. I answered carefully. Truth doesn't need embellishment. As I spoke, I noticed how the officer listened, not just to the facts, but to the pauses between them. The places where anger wanted to live but didn't get permission. Outside, the HOA president arrived. Late, breathless, trying to look composed. He stood on the porch, shifting his weight, glancing at the patrol car parked across the street, like it might disappear if he didn't acknowledge it. When he was invited in, he didn't sit. He apologized quickly. Too quickly. "We had no idea," he said. "This is not how we operate." I didn't respond. The officer did. "Your records suggest multiple complaints," he said evenly. "Concerns about conduct, about overreach." The man swallowed. "We're reviewing our procedures," he offered. "Good," the officer replied. "You'll have time." Outside, a second patrol car arrived. Then a supervisor. The quiet escalation of accountability. My phone buzzed. I ignored it. The officer paused and looked at me. "There's something else," he said. "We need to clarify your background for the report." I nodded. He glanced at his notes, then back at me. "You served," he said. "Yes." There was no pride in the answer. No defiance. Just fact. He nodded again, this time with recognition. "Thank you," he said simply. The HOA president's eyes flicked up, then back down. That was when it clicked for him. The man whose driveway had been disrupted. The father whose child had been terrified. The homeowner they'd ignored wasn't someone they could dismiss, not because of rank, but because of resolve. Outside, Karen sat in the back of the patrol car. She could see the house through the window, see people moving with purpose, see that the world hadn't stopped for her explanations. An officer approached her with a clipboard, not the kind that enforced rules, the kind that documented consequences. She spoke, then stopped, spoke again, then fell silent. Inside, the plainclothes officer closed his notebook. "That's all for N." "Ow," he said. "We'll be in touch." He stood, then paused. "For what it's worth," he added, "you handled this the right way." I nodded once. After they left, the HOA president lingered. "We'll be issuing a statement," he said. "Formal apologies. Policy revisions. Make sure they're real," I replied. "Not just words." He nodded quickly. "I understand." When he finally left, the house exhaled again. My daughter stirred. "Is she gone?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "She can't hurt anyone here." "Sarah?" she asked. "She's being taken care of." She relaxed at that, drifting back towards sleep. As evening fell, the news vans came and went. Headlines formed. Stories took shape. But inside the house, none of that mattered. What mattered was the steady rhythm of my daughter's breathing. The simple fact that fear no longer owned the room. Power hadn't shouted, it hadn't demanded, it had listened. And in doing so, it had reclaimed its purpose. Later that night, my phone buzzed again. This time, I answered. "We're moving forward," the voice said. "Charges are being prepared. The HOA is cooperating." "Good," I said. "We'll keep you informed." After the call, I sat in the dark living room for a long time, thinking about how easily power can be mistaken for permission, how often silence enables cruelty, and how quickly both disappear when the truth is witnessed. Outside, the neighborhood lights clicked on one by one. Inside, my daughter slept. And somewhere, Karen was learning the difference between authority and accountability, one document at a time. Consequences don't arrive all at once. They arrive in layers. The morning after felt heavier than the night before, not with fear, but with the weight of what couldn't be undone. The house was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was full of aftershocks. Every sound seemed deliberate. Every pause meant something. My daughter woke late. She blinky. Against the sunlight and took a few slow breaths. The way she'd learned to do when her body needed time to catch up with the world. "Is today normal?" she asked softly. I sat beside her on the couch. "It can be," I said, "as much as you want it to be." She thought about that. "Can Sarah come back?" she asked. "Not today," I replied. "But she's okay." "She asked about you. That helped." I saw it in the way her shoulders relaxed, just a little. Outside, the neighborhood moved carefully. Doors opened and closed with less noise. Cars rolled by more slowly. People looked toward our house and then looked away, not out of guilt exactly, but awareness. The knock came mid-morning, not urgent, official. I opened the door to two people I hadn't met before, one from the city, one from the HOA's legal counsel. They carried folders, thick ones. They asked to sit. They didn't rush. They explained what would happen next. Statements would be formalized. Evidence reviewed. Charges pursued. Internal investigations launched, not just into Karen's actions, but into how many times she'd been allowed to cross lines without consequence. "We take this seriously," the city representative said. I believed her, not because of her words, but because of her questions. They were specific, careful, focused on patterns, not excuses. How long had complaints existed? Who reviewed them? Who dismissed them? The answers filled pages. When they left, the house felt quieter again. My daughter was drawing at the coffee table. "What are you making?" I asked. She held it up. It was the driveway. She'd drawn herself and Sarah sitting together. She'd drawn the house behind them. She'd drawn me standing close, and in the corner, she'd drawn a binder, small, closed, set aside. "That's where it goes," she said, tapping it with her crayon. "Not in people's hands." I nodded. "You're right. By afternoon, the furs." Official notice arrived. Karen was suspended from all HOA activities pending investigation. Not a headline, not dramatic, but real. Another message followed soon after, this one from the HOA board itself. They were issuing a public apology. They were revising policies. They were mandating training. They were removing unilateral enforcement authority. They were trying to put the house back together after letting it burn quietly for too long. The apology didn't erase what happened, but it mattered that it existed. The phone rang again. This time, it was Sarah. Her voice was tired but steady. "I just wanted to hear her," she said. "If that's okay." I handed the phone to my daughter. "Sarah?" my daughter asked, eyes bright. "I'm here," Sarah replied. "And I'm okay." My daughter smiled. "I was scared," she said honestly. "I know," Sarah said. "But you were very brave." There was a pause. "And you helped me," Sarah added. "You know that, right?" My daughter nodded, tears gathering but not falling. "Come back when you're better," she said. "I will," Sarah promised. After the call, my daughter leaned against me. "I don't like when grown-ups yell," she said quietly. "They should know better." "They should," I agreed. That evening, the neighborhood meeting was announced. Emergency session, attendance required. I didn't go. I didn't need to. What mattered was that it happened, that people showed up, that questions were asked out loud, that silence lost its grip. News traveled fast, too fast sometimes. Stories simplified what shouldn't be simplified, but the truth stayed intact. A child had been harmed by someone who mistook authority for control. A nurse had been hurt protecting her patient. A system had failed by looking away. And now, that system was being forced to look directly at itself. The next morning, another update arrived. Karen had been formally removed. No appeals. No delays. Her binder, once her symbol of power, was now just an item listed in evidence. My daughter watched me read the message. "Is she mad?" she asked. "Probably," I said gently, "but that's not our concern." "What is our concern?" "That you feel safe," I replied. "That you feel seen." She nodded. "I do," she said. That afternoon we went back to the driveway, not to prove anything, just to exist there again. The chair was positioned carefully, the equipment adjusted quietly. The sun was warm, not harsh. A neighbor walked by and waved. Another stopped and offered a soft smile. No one stared, no one judged. They just let us be. My daughter reached out and touched the concrete. "It feels the same," she said. "Yes," I replied, "but we're different." "How? We know what matters now." She thought about that. Then she smiled. "People," she said. "Yes," I answered. "People." As the sun dipped lower, I realized something else. Consequences aren't just punishment. They're correction. They're learning. They're the slow rebuilding of trust where it was allowed to rot. And sometimes they're the quiet understanding that power doesn't belong to the loudest voice. It belongs to those who protect, who listen, who stand between harm and the vulnerable, without needing permission. That night, as I tucked my daughter in, she asked one last question. "Daddy, are we okay now?" I brushed her hair back gently. "Yes," I said, "we are." And for the first time since it all began, I meant it without reservation. The house learned how to breathe again. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. But little by little, the tension loosened its grip. On the walls, on the rooms, on the spaces between words. Morning arrived softly. Sunlight slipped through the curtains in pale lines, resting on the floor as if it didn't want to wake anyone too quickly. The neighborhood outside sounded ordinary aga. In, a delivery truck down the street, birds in the trees, a door closing somewhere nearby. Normal sounds. My daughter woke slowly, blinking at the light. She took her time, the way she always had to. There was no rush, no pressure to perform bravery or strength for anyone else. I sat beside her. "How do you feel?" I asked. She considered the question carefully. "Better," she said. "Tired, but better." "That's honest," I replied. "Honest is good." She smiled faintly. "I dreamed," she added. "Oh, About the driveway, she said, but it was quiet, and Sarah was there, and nobody was yelling. I nodded. That's a good dream. She reached for my hand, her grip gentle but certain. Can we go outside today? She asked. Yes, I said. Whenever you're ready. We didn't rush it. Breakfast came first, then medication, then the slow, practiced routine of getting her comfortable, supported, prepared. There was comfort in the familiarity of it all. When we finally stepped outside, the driveway looked the same. Same concrete, same slope, same shadows from the trees. But it felt different, not dangerous, not watched, just open. She sat quietly for a moment, taking it in. I was scared here, she said. I know, but I'm not now. She lifted her face toward the sun, eyes closed, letting the warmth rest on her skin. Across the street, a neighbor waved. Another nodded. No one stared. No one whispered. They had learned. We stayed outside as long as she wanted. When she grew tired, we went back in without ceremony. That afternoon, the final messages arrived. Formal confirmations, completed reviews, resolutions adopted. Karen would not be returning to any position of authority. Here or elsewhere, the HOA's structure had changed. Oversight installed, accessibility policies rewritten, training mandated. None of it erased the harm, but it made repetition harder, and that mattered. Later, Sarah came by, not in uniform, not as a nurse, just as herself. My daughter's face lit up the moment she saw her. "Sarah!" she cried. Sarah knelt carefully, smiling. "Hey, superstar," she said. "How are you feeling?" "Better," my daughter replied proudly. "Daddy says I'm healing." Sarah glanced at me. "He's right," she said. "Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means growing around what happened." They sat together for a while, talking quietly, about stories, about favorite animals, about nothing important and everything. When Sarah left, my daughter watched her go. "She's brave," she said again. "Yes," I replied, "and kind." That evening, the neighborhood meeting concluded. I didn't attend. I didn't need to. I already knew the outcome. Apologies issued, leadership replaced, commitments made publicly. Sometimes accountability doesn't need witnesses to matter. It just needs permanence. As night fell, the house glowed softly from within. Dinner was simple, conversation lighter. Before bed, my daughter asked one last question. "Daddy, are people still allowed to be mean?" I smiled gently. "Sometimes," I said, "but they're not allowed to hurt others. And when they try, they're stopped." She thought about that. Good, because I don't like when people get hurt. Neither do I. I tucked her in, adjusting the blankets just right, smoothing her hair back the way she liked. As I turned off the light, she whispered, "Thank you for coming out so fast." "I always will," I said. "You never have to wonder about that." She drifted to sleep quickly, breathing slow and even. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, listening, protecting. Outside, the streetlights flickered, on. The neighborhood rested, not in ignorance this time, but in awareness. What had happened here wouldn't be forgotten, but it wouldn't define us either, because fear doesn't get the last word. Care does. And in a house where love stands ready, quiet, steady, unyielding, safety isn't something you wait for. It's something you build, one calm breath at a time.